Good evening, everyone. Greetings from the Southern Delaware Alliance for Racial Justice. We appreciate your involvement in our ongoing conversation. It's an essential conversation if we are ever to attain public consensus on the existence and the impact on structural racism on everyone. But the focus of the Alliance is the direct effect on Black men, women, and youth who have been the unwilling recipients of America's original sin with all of its devastating consequences for over 400 years. We have another opportunity tonight brought on by the recent murders of Black Americans, which as I go back and do my research, it's a regular thing. There have been many opportunities throughout the decades, and there are many legislative attempts to end this 400-year reign of racial abuse. I beseech our younger participants to let this opportunity be successful. When I was your age, I bought the demand that I be patient, that change was coming. And indeed, when you're young, you think, well, I got 20 years to work on the problem. Well, those of us who have been around for a while have worked on it for 50 years. And the problem just keeps getting worse and worse. So don't let time be your enemy. Indeed, there are moments of good change. The Voting Rights Act of 1965. But the climb up the mountain was slower and more difficult than the slide down the mountain that feels like an avalanche every time significant legislation is replaced, as has happened with the Voting Rights Act, by new regressive legislation, and every time another Black person is killed and the murderer is protected by one of the many reinterpretations of the constitutional amendments, which was supposed to protect and guarantee the rights of all citizens. The future of this country and its young citizens is at stake. If we cannot change the public narrative about Black America, if we cannot build the public consensus that is needed, then I feel for all of America's future generations. I ask you to join and or continue to fight for the soul of the country so that you reap the promises made by some of our founding fathers. We're about to see a wonderful documentary produced by Calvin Jackson, which will lay out the perspective of tonight's town hall. I am so grateful to Calvin, who is the chair of our communication and social media committee, and for this wonderful work of art. At the end of the short documentary, you will meet Don Peterson, another wonderful challenger to America's structural racism, who will be our moderator for the evening, and he will introduce our wonderful panel of speakers. There will be an opportunity for you to ask some questions. Please write those questions in the question and answer room so that we can give them to the panelists again. Thank you for your continuing the journey with us to racial and social justice. And Calvin, can we see that film?
Oh, evening. My name is Don Peterson, and I'm the chair of the Outreach Committee for the Southern Delaware Alliance for Racial Justice, and it truly is my honor to be the moderator for tonight's town hall. When I first saw that video that Calvin pulled together the other day, both Charlotte and I saw it for the first time, and it was and is incredibly moving, and how appropriate for tonight's conversation. Tonight, you're going to meet 4 young people who are young, gifted, and Black. And I think you're going to be as impressed with them as all of the rest of us are. And before we get started, just a little bit of housekeeping. Charlotte mentioned about if you have questions, we do want to save some time at the end for questions from the audience. And please make sure you use the Q&A button down at the bottom, not the chat room button. That's the mistake I've made in the past. So use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And we'll try to get to as many questions as we can. If a question is directed to one of our panelists, just please let us know that. And then I will just make the standard disclaimer that the opinions expressed by our panelists tonight are theirs alone and do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of the Southern Delaware Alliance for Racial Justice. Well, in the midst of so much chaos that we see every day, such turmoil and such pain, I, as an aging member of the boomer generation, look constantly for signs of hope for a better future, for a world that will be safe and healthy and prosperous for the generations to come. And one of the things that gives me the most hope is knowing that great things are being accomplished by young people across the country, including right here in Delaware. It's encouraging to see so many young people stand up for and speak out on issues of justice and equity. Tonight, I'd like to introduce to you 4 young people who give me that hope and have inspired tonight's town hall. I'm going to keep the introduction short so that we can have more time for conversation. First, I'd like to introduce Jazmine Elzey. She is a student at the Central Academy of Technology and Arts in Monroe, North Carolina. She lives in Waxhaw, North Carolina, but I first met her when she was up here visiting her grandmother, the Reverend Marjorie Belmont Burns in Rehoboth Beach. We met at the June 5th rally in Rehoboth Beach, where 600 people lined Route 1 to protest the murder of George Floyd. The Cape Gazette published a picture of Jazmine kneeling at the demonstration holding the American flag. That photo that you saw in the video has become iconic for many of us. And subsequent to that rally, Jazmine wrote an inspiring letter to the Cape Gazette that she's going to share with us tonight. I'd next like to introduce Jalyn Powell. Jalyn is an advocate, community leader, and owner of Out Loud LLC. She's the organizer for the Walk Change marches and rallies here in Sussex County. She holds a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science from Delaware State University, where she was the recipient of the George Washington Leadership Award. She also holds a Master of Arts in Law with a concentration in Human Rights and the Rule of Law from Regent University School of Law, and is now pursuing a PhD in Transformative Social Change at Saybrook University. Kyle Sheppard is a graduate also of Del State University with a BS in psychology focused in drug and alcohol assessment and co-occurring disorders, and a Master of Education for Educational Leadership. He's also a first-year doctoral student focusing on equity, social justice, public policy, and the impact of structural racism on the social determinants of health and education. Kyle, that is quite a mouthful, and I hope you get a chance to explain to us what that's about. He currently provides staff and volunteer support to the Metropolitan Wilmington Urban League in its Youth and Education Committee and the James H. Gilliam Senior Fellowship Program. Kyle has received numerous local, state, and national service-based awards. And last but surely not least, I'd like to introduce to you Sade Truiett. Sade is a graduate also of Dell State. Dell State produces some amazing graduates. She holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in English and holds a Master of Science degree in Public Administration from Wilmington University. In 2014, Sade launched a mentoring organization called Girl Talk. GIRL is an acronym for Gifted, Intelligent, Royal Leader. Her organization started with 6 girls, and now she mentors over 200 girls in the state of Delaware. She's active on several boards and community development projects in Delaware, and as if that's not enough, she's also a licensed minister. What a group, huh? What I'd like to do is turn first to Jazmine. Hi, Jazmine. Welcome. You're on mute. Can you unmute yourself?
Hi.
Hey, thanks for joining us. And what I'd like to do, Jazmine, is before you read your letter, I'd like to just ask you a question about what was it that inspired you to write your letter?
Of course. So after the protest, I believe it was June 5th, my grandmother encouraged me to write it because we were just having a conversation, and she was like, that would be, and then we just agreed that I should write it down because what we were having, it was a really nice conversation we were having, and I just put my thoughts into words.
Great, great. And would you mind reading that letter to us, Jazmine?
Sure. It's called What It's Like Being a Black Teen in America. Growing up Black in America, I've sadly had to learn how to deal with this disgusting disease known as racism. I've been taught not to cause a scene in some situations just to prevent being seen as the aggressor. I've learned to suppress my feelings to not make others feel uncomfortable. I remember in 5th grade, all my female peers had a sleepover and I wasn't invited. I thought maybe it was because they didn't like me, but not because of my skin color. When I went back to school the next day, I found out my other peer, who just so happened to also be Black, wasn't invited either. It may not seem like that big of a deal to some people, but that small exclusion led to many more. I have always gone to predominantly white schools, and I do sometimes feel excluded. There was always the group of people who would call me names like Darky, Black Knight, Midnight, etc. It would hurt my feelings, but it was so normalized, and I felt like if I even showed that I was uncomfortable, that I could be seen as sensitive. The 3 years of middle school were definitely the hardest out of all my years of being in school so far. The constant name calling and picking were frustrating and made me feel less worthy. And even these 2 years of high school have been challenging. The majority of my friends are Trump supporters, and I never had a problem with that because I didn't want to end years of friendships over different political views. Up until recently, I never even thought of ending a friendship over who they support. Every single one of my friends knows that I'm pretty chill and don't involve myself in politics. But since Trump has been in office, the internal racism has been starting to show more and more in daily life. I had many friends make slavery jokes and call it dark humor, but I'm not allowed to be offended because it's just a joke. Now, I'm not against educating others about modern day racism, but I feel like we shouldn't be obligated or responsible for the undoing of someone else's ignorance. It gets very frustrating and stressful preaching the same things over and over for years upon years. It's also frustrating hearing things like racism will always exist, or it's in our nature when racism is taught. No one is born racist, and it's always the people who have never experienced racism saying these triggering statements. We should be doing everything in our power to eliminate the normalization of racism because there are so many people who are not afraid of being so hateful towards a race. People say the rioting and looting is domestic terrorism and not American, but won't admit that racism is violating many parts of the US Constitution that clearly states that everyone is equal. So does this mean anyone who is racist is anti-American and should be hated just as much as many people hate on the Black Lives Matter movement and people fighting for basic human rights and equality? Thank you for being a part of the positive change and willing to listen to how I feel, and hope you have a blessed day.
Thank you so much, Jazmine. Still just as beautiful as the first time I read it when I saw it in the Cape Gazette. Thanks for doing that for us. Let me ask the rest of the panelists, any kind of reaction to what you just heard Jazmine read? And you're all on mute, I should say.
This is Kyle. I'll just share that to be able to share, I just would say thank you, Jazmine. Too often, I think young Black people, Black women specifically, in addition to that, Black women with a darker skin tone, those with different experiences that don't identify as the norm or the perceived level of what is welcome and allowed to be able to have space within our society is often silenced. So as much as I'm thankful and grateful for words to be able to be like that, to be shared, it's sad. And to tap into that level of vulnerability, I appreciate it. And I also would just ask that we not only just stay as outsiders or as those listening from a place of sympathy, but empathy is the process of connecting with what you heard. And to connect with what you hear requires action. So I challenge those who maybe have heard that for the first time, not to just provide remorse and sympathy, which things that are needed. And I won't speak for Jazmine and what she requires or what she wants people to receive from that, but in alignment with what I think this coalition and what programs like this provide is to step away doing something about what you just felt. And that's important. So for you, Jazmine, for me, I'm just holding myself accountable that I want to commit myself to work so where Black women and Black girls who share your experience and share your stories feel safe in doing so, and that we reduce and eliminate the amount of chances for you to have to do it in the first place.
Well said. Thank you, Kyle. Anyone else like to comment before we move on?
I just echo that. I just appreciate you creating such a space for that to be shared. And when you were reading it, it made me go back to the colorism that we as Black women face in our own culture, you know, light skin versus dark skin, and just having to constantly model that for other Black women, especially teen girls, that, you know, just because you're darker or you're lighter, that we have got to get past that as a culture so the world can see us as a united front. So I just really, that was the first thing that stuck in my mind when you said about just walking in the halls and being a darker hue, that I faced that. My friends have faced that, my light-skinned friends have faced it, and so that made me think about that and just being more of an advocate, just making sure that we're on a united front and we're getting over, moving past this colorism, this whole idea of are you lighter than the brown bag that came in, you know, the whole history behind that. So just thank you for creating a space for that.
It's not much I can add after Kyle and Sade, but thank you, Jazmine. Just thank you for your bravery, your honesty, and your transparency. You don't know how much you could spark confidence for young girls and those watching to start to begin to tell their stories. And Sade, just, you know, echoing you, colorism is real. For me, of course, it was slightly different. It was, you know, you're too white for the Black folks, too Black for the white folks type deal, or you're not really Black, you're white because of my lighter skin tone. But it's a real thing that we face within and with outside of our culture. So thank you for being honest, and it like Kyle said, encourage us all to be accountable, to take action after that.
And the whole "you're cute for a dark-skinned girl" or "you're pretty for a light-skinned girl," like those comments just make me just so uncomfortable. Like, why can we not just be beautiful women?
Period. That's it.
Well, thank you all for those comments. I again, every one of the things that we heard were so meaningful for all of us in the community. So I'd like to have our audience get to know you just a little bit better as we start to move into your activism and the things that you have done and are doing and plan to do in the future. I wonder if each of you could just briefly tell us a little bit about where you grew up, a little bit about family and your school life as you were growing up, and just a couple minutes for each of you. If we could start maybe with Jalyn.
So, hi everybody, I'm Jalyn. I grew up in Lincoln, Delaware, but I went to school at Milford Senior High School. School for me was, it wasn't a challenging experience as far as verbal racism or anything like that, but I was like one of the only African American or Black and brown people in the honors classes or the AP classes. So feeling like you had to do more to, I guess, you know, stay in the race with those who are not of color, or even uphold to a certain standard as them. I found myself studying more. I found myself doing extra hours just to feel like I fit in. Education was a big thing growing up in my household. Like my mom definitely encouraged, you know, good grades, because for us it was like, you know, being a Black and brown person, you have to have that educational backing behind you to ultimately, in a sense, be successful in life. Not saying you have to, but that was what we were taught. So education was a big thing for me. Literally, Black and brown people, even with my teachers, I never had a Black and brown teacher or educator in a higher level class, so AP or honors class. Most of them were, you know, the regular levels. And just knowing that, I think diversity and inclusion wasn't a big deal for my school. You know, when I was in high school, now you start to see high schools and middle schools and school districts start to have those inclusion and diversity officers and programs put in place so they can start to make change. But growing up, that's not what we saw. It was pretty much like it is what it is. If you were Black or brown in a higher level class, you were, I don't want to say I didn't have that many friends, but most of your friends were not like, they didn't look like you. So I had I had white friends or people that weren't of color. And those that were of color kind of felt like, you know, I was stuck up, or maybe I thought, you know, I was too good for them. And that wasn't the case at all. It's just, you know, education, like I said, was just very, very honed in on in my household. So, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. How about you, Kyle?
I'm still trying to get my notes ready, Don. I would say I was born in Philadelphia. I grew up in Newcastle, Delaware. I grew up in Newcastle County throughout the majority of my childhood and adolescence. I went to 3 different types of schools. I went to a private school, an early elementary, faith-based program, and then I went to public in middle school, and then I went to a VOTEC school, St. George's VOTEC. I was part of the first graduating class. So we started in 2006, and we were the first class at that time. Very interesting experience. Took a lot from it. I think now that I'm getting older, I can contextualize and look back at the experiences I've been through and start to place language over some of those things. And I think that will come out in a little bit more throughout this panel that I can share about. Besides that, I mean, my immediate family, very thankful for a brother 2 years older than me who showed me what determination looks like. I come from a father who shows me what commitment and what love and compassion in his own unique way looks like. And a mother, and coming from education, she retired from the Red Clay School District, and who taught me that doing good, even by itself, isn't always just enough, given the climate and given the atmosphere and the environment in which she worked in and instilled in me that I probably took for granted at that time growing up. Nobody wants to go to school and then come back home to another educator at the end of the day. So that was an experience. But at the same time, I will say that that's one of the earliest points of advocacy in which I had in my life, was to have somebody advocate on my behalf when I was spending the majority of my developmental years within a system in which is not advocating for you. So to have that and to have people in your corner and in your tribe and in your community, that was their early ground set. And I really owe it all to that. I owe it all to community about who I am today. Thanks.
Thanks. Wonderful. Sade.
I am a proud Caesar Rodney High School School District graduate and alumni. So I'm a military brat. I was raised on a military base most of my life. My dad was in the military, served almost 25 years. So I have been around a lot of different people over the course of my life. And my parents have done a really good job in nurturing us and helping us to understand diversity, but to always remember that we're Black. And so our experience sometimes in life will be different, and not because we did anything wrong, but just the culture and heritage that we came from. So it was Jesus and education in my household. I was a church girl. That's what we knew, going to church, and then it was go to school and get grades, get good grades. I have two amazing brothers. I have an older brother who later in his life played professional sports. I have a younger brother who, Josh is the baby child, will always be the baby child. So we always know how that baby one is, but I love him to pieces. Come from a very caring, nurturing family, very blessed to that we are still as close-knit, that my parents have made sure that we stay very, very close, especially in this type of climate that we're in now. So that's just a little bit about my family life.
Thank you, Sade. And Jazmine, we heard a little bit about your background as a student. Is there anything else that you'd like to add?
Well, I was born in Easton, Maryland, but I moved to North Carolina second grade. I don't really remember, but I've been here for a long time. I've been to 3 different schools, 4. They've all been predominantly white. I went to a charter school. That was middle school. That was the rough years. And this year I go to a magnet school where I'm studying cybersecurity. And I just started college classes today, which is exciting.
Oh, yay.
Yes, and we've been doing virtual. And yeah, that's you guys can say.
Thank you, Jazmine. Some of you started to touch on it, and I'd kind of like to delve into that a little bit more and just find out from each of you what were some of the biggest influences, who were some of the biggest influences, or maybe it was an event that inspired you, and how did they sort of guide you towards the activism that you're showing today? Let's start with Kyle this time. You got your notes together, Kyle?
I am prepared. I don't have notes. What inspired our activism?
Yeah.
I'll be as transparent on this call as I can within honoring the space, recognizing some of our attendees and the heavy faith-based as well. So I'll say that I just shared with somebody over about 2 weeks ago, and they asked about why now? Why is this time period we're in so important? And why is getting involved so important? And what I mentioned was that there's a notion within one of my fraternity involvements that I believe is in a lot of other organizations as well, that, you don't seek out or you don't just come across and get into this fraternity. The essence of the fraternity and what it embodies is within you, and you discover what's already there. So when I think about activism, it wasn't, for me, there was not one particular moment in which a switch turned on for me. And that's not to say that, because I don't actually identify or label myself or see myself as an activist, as much as I am curious about what does the work look like. And I think for me, the work began when I started to hit resistance and roadblocks and a level of anger in which I realize if I keep this anger as it is, it will be harmful for the atmosphere in which I'm dwelling, both for myself and for those around me and those who are imposing the barriers within me, whether that's in the school, whether that's in the community, right? Whether that's professionally. We encounter racism, systemic racism, structural violence, structural racism. There's a lot of fancy words out there to describe just the way that we feel and what we experience. And for me, it tapped into a level of accountability and activism, and acting on that level of activism was when I could see that the things I was experiencing, that I'm not alone, and that I had a level of responsibility to make sure that the individuals who come after me or who are beside me don't experience some of the gravity of the scenarios that I experience, right? And that's from police brutality, right? Not something I really share publicly with too many people, but I've personally experienced. That is within being pushed out of educational systems, right? That's up until this recent time during COVID-19, a matter of healthcare. I've personally witnessed our own healthcare institutions within our own state deny people, both through policy and through systems and through practices and a whole bunch of language and jargon and processes that we just have to do this a certain way, and also outright racism, right? And that's an ongoing process. For me, I didn't have a one instance, but it was when I realized that the burdens I hold is a shared burden within the communities in which I'm trying to struggle with, a positive struggle, a progressive struggle. And that wasn't a burden that at the moment that I'm able to drop. But sometimes to be very vulnerable, you want to drop it. You know, you don't have any strength. You don't have any energy to keep on going. But being in community with those who are, it allows you to keep going. So I want to give an honest answer with a lot of my questions, as opposed to giving the best answer, but I really want to give honest responses to my experience today.
You know, that Kyle, that just reminds me that you can't classify anger as a bad emotion. Sometimes it can be a great inspiration and a great motivator. So thanks for sharing that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Sade, a little bit about the biggest influences in your life and how that helped guide you towards your own activism.
Outside of my parents, my biggest influence has always been Angela Davis and Oprah Winfrey. Angela Davis' passion and just like, I'm gonna get it done, don't need any permission, as a young girl in elementary school has always just fired me up, has always been like, women, girls can do anything. And then learning more about her story, her struggles, and just how she just became the hero that she is, has always been something that inspired me. And I really didn't understand activism until I began to advocate for teen girls. You know, I deal with teen girls who are considered at risk. And so to have to be their advocate and have to do different activities to support them, that really is where that fire for me with activism comes into. That I really want them to be the best women possible. They will not be angry Black women. They will not be timid women. They'll be women that know their legal rights, that know who they are and know what they're capable of doing. So to have to advocate for them in their education, in their family lives, helping them understand what's happening in our world so that they're not bitter and remorseful, but they're taking it and they are protesting, they're registering to vote, they're getting involved in their community. That is what really drives it for me when it comes to activism, and seeing other great women do this in their own pockets. It doesn't always have to be a protest. It doesn't always have to be, you know, on a platform. It's the church mother that's making cookies and cakes and sandwiches for the men to go out and protest. You know, it's the churches holding us down, praying and keeping us accountable to our faith. You know, it's the parents that are giving their children space to be who they am, to talk about traumatic experiences. And then we need those who protest. We need those who go out and make noise for us. But I think activism for me has always been very intentional with making sure that our little Black girls know who they are and they know what they're capable of doing.
Thank you. Thank you. As I was preparing for tonight, I was looking around for some pithy quotes, and you mentioned Angela Davis. And Angela Davis said, you can never stop. And as older people, that's like me, we have to learn how to take leadership from the youth. And I guess I would say that this is what I'm attempting to do right now. So, smart lady. How about Jalyn? How about you? Some influences and what guided you towards your own activism?
So for me, and I realized after Kyle and Sade talked that I didn't really talk about my family, but they are a huge, huge influence and party of mine outside of God. Starting out, I studied activism through my political science degree, of course, and then my human rights background. So I did more so the study of activism because I too witnessed police brutality and systemic racism personally and within my family. And I wanted to be the one to say, look, here are your rights. Here's what the system is and is not allowed to do. Here's what you can advocate and speak for. Here's where you're not being adequately serviced or efficiently serviced. I wanted to be the one to educate and go back and inform the community of where the discrepancies and disparities were. So that's where I started out as far as the influence behind studying activism. Then with my pop-up, he's like a big driver as far as the way I think. So I would come home with like straight A's and I would be so hyped. Come home like pop up, blah, blah, blah. I got straight A's or I got 100 on the test, and he would give me no buzz whatsoever. Wouldn't be hype or nothing. So one day I asked him, because I got tired of it. Like I'm here, all excited. You're not giving me no feedback. And he said to me one day, he was like, Jalyn, I don't commend you for doing what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to get good grades. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that, it's a good thing, getting A's and things of that nature, but he instilled in me from that day that there are certain things that we expect to be applauded for when really, we're fish swimming, and you don't reward fish for swimming. So, and my family's confidence in me to accomplish certain things and not see it as, overachieving definitely pushes me to just do more. And my dad said something to me when I started the Walk of Change. He said, Jalyn, as a culture, we're very adaptive. Like we learn to adapt to everything, to environments. We learn to adapt to how people perceive us. We learn to adapt to how we should react and act in society. He was like, now we're at a time and place in life where I'm tired of being adaptive. Like, I don't want to feel like I have to adapt to being human. And when he said that, I'm like, okay, well, now I need to figure out how I can not be the chameleon and adapt to my environments, this, that, and the third everywhere I go. But how can I be the one to stand out and be okay with standing out and be okay with making people uncomfortable because I'm having an uncomfortable conversation about why I should feel comfortable. So they're definitely major, major influences. And then my mom and grandma, of course, their prayers and their constant encouragement and reassurance definitely helped me in this fight, in this activism venue. And then everything I do, which I know I get positive, negative, cordial feedback, but everything I do is definitely driven by God's vision. I always say I am the vessel, he is a visionary, and I allow him to direct me as such, whether it's a peaceful demonstration, rally, informative platform. I allow him to direct me in whatever way is going to get the message across and enact change in reactions and actions after the fact. So
Thanks. I've just really been impressed, as so many other people have here in Sussex County, with the work you've been doing with the Walk of Change, and I want to thank you for that. Yeah. Jazmine, you're maybe just getting started down the road to activism. What's inspiring you these days?
Personally, it's not really a specific person. Like my grandmother, yes, she has helped, but I think it's just that I like saying that I have a voice and that people can hear, like, especially when I submitted my letter and I got so much feedback, and like, I didn't realize that just saying my story was so inspiring. And I just like to be able to speak to people that I relate to. And because I didn't really have that growing up, because it was just me and like two other people that were African American or POCs. So I like to have these little groups, break off groups, where we can all talk about our struggles and we can relate and just know that I'm not alone in it, even though like I know I'm not. But in North Carolina, it kind of feels that way because it's South. So and also like I was saying, Reverend Burns, my grandmother, she I like to hear her when she's speaking. It's just inspiring. It makes me it makes me want to be like that, to where I can speak to people and, you know, just relate to them.
Great, thank you. Yeah, it's great to have a grandma who's a preacher, huh? You're also accomplished, and you've all done some amazing things, even at your young age. Um, my guess is that somewhere along the line, you run into some obstacles that maybe have informed you and formed your own special views towards what you want to accomplish in the world. What's an obstacle that you've approached, that you've had to deal with, that you have learned from, and what have you learned from it? And I know that's a long, convoluted question, but how about if we start with Sade on that question?
Oh, wow. What a loaded question. If I could just be honest, the obstacle that has been a lot has just been simply the year 2020. It has been overwhelming. It has been a lot to process. It's been a lot to navigate through. It's been a lot to explain to other young Black girls that I mentor and other organizations I'm a part of that look to myself and others as a leader to kind of give answers and guidance. People think because you're a minister or you're this degree or that degree that you have all of the answers. And I think collectively we all are trying to figure this out. I mean, we have COVID, we have the racial tension, we have an election coming up. It's just been a lot. But the biggest thing that has kept me grounded is my devotion to public service, is my steadfastness in why I'm doing this. And I'm not doing this for any other reason than to see humanity move forward, for people to see that despite what's happening, that love always wins the war. And so I'm encouraged that through everything that's happening to just keep going, to just pick myself up and keep going. And on days where there's another thing on the news, I'm a publicist professionally, I have an incredible job, an incredible boss who's watching. And so as a publicist, I'm bombarded all day with the good, the bad, the ugly, and the really ugly. But I've learned that you have to pause. You have to turn off the news on Saturdays and Sundays. You have to allow yourself to cry and grieve over people that you don't know because you feel that pain of another one of our brothers lost, another one of our brothers killed, another one of our brothers shackled to a bed in the hospital when he didn't do anything. You know, we have to process all of that. So how I've overcome the obstacles in 2020 is to keep grounded in my faith and to keep going. That we, as these young, gifted Black people on this panel, we have to keep going. They have to see us persevere and fight through some of the toughest days so that they know when it's third term, here's the torch, and you got to keep going. You just got to keep running the race and remember why we're doing this. It's not for an accolade. It's not to get on a panel. It's not to get an award. It's not to get a pat on the back. It's not even to get a thank you, that I'm doing this because God told me to do this and it's my purpose, but because there's somebody out there. There's an entire human race that needs to see us. They need to see Black people. Let me be very honest. They need to see Black people continue to persevere and to fight the good fight of faith.
I don't know who your boss is out there, but he's an awfully lucky man, Sade.
Bernard Edwards.
Jazmine, something that maybe you've run into, and you described some pretty big obstacles as far as I'm concerned in your letter. What's the learning there for you?
Something that encouraged me to keep going is just the impact, and also friendships, learning more about the friendships that should have been ended a while ago. Losing friends is a part of the process, I think, with what I've learned and what has happened just in the past few months, people showing their true colors, even though the microaggression was happening, but it was just micro. So it took me a while, but people's true colors eventually came out, and we will learn. I learn every day something new about myself and others. So I think continuing this activism journey will help me learn more about myself and become a better me.
Great, Thank you so much. Jalyn, how about you? An obstacle and maybe what you've learned about it to help spur you along.
Okay, so for mine, it's a little personal. In 2016, my twin brother and best friend passed away in a car accident. And my mom like encouraged me to like take a year off school. I was interning my junior year at Del State. And my mindset, I knew that there were young girls, family, even older women that kind of looked to me to be the strong person in the family. So I didn't want to pause in life. I wanted to keep going even when I didn't know if I could or if I didn't know how. But the fact that people could see me to keep going in a time where, life hits you hard, sometimes you feel alone. It's, one of the most traumatic events in my life. But if people could just see me like pick up and keep going, whether I looked like, I was okay or not, or I felt like I was okay or not, just to see me keep going could be inspirational enough. And starting out my first semester definitely was probably one of the hardest. Grades slipped, but the longer I kept going, I started to find my niche and regain my strength and just trust God to rebuild me back up. Ended up getting straight A's my last semester for the first time in my whole college career. Like I said, don't know how, but definitely that gave me the drive to know that you just can't stop. Life gives you lemons, things happen. You need to figure out how, you're going to make lemonade out of it. If you got to keep going until you get the water, keep going until you get the sugar, keep going until you get the right flavor, just keep going. And then at the end, you'll have a good big glass of lemonade. So that definitely helped me out. But yeah, so in a sense, their loss was definitely a big gain for me and in my heart and my life, and I cannot thank them enough. My brother's last conversation to me was, "Jalyn, you're my sister. I will die for you." And I do believe that he did, in a sense, in a positive way. So can never thank him enough for that, for laying his life down for me. That's the biggest sacrifice and visual of love that anyone could ever display. So
Well, thanks for sharing that, Jalyn, and our hearts go out to you for the loss of your brother. Kyle, how about you, sir?
Absolutely. I have three specific things that I'm thinking about, and I'll try to be very succinct with them. One was relatively recent, and to be quite frank, I had to leave a employer in a position in which was no longer fruitful and was no longer healthy. When, to be frank, I noticed that job started to value protocol and partnerships over the people that we served. And they also began to value the status quo or establishment more than we valued equity. And when that became clear to me, it became a sign for me that I just know I had served my purpose there, and things have run their course, and that season was time to change, right? And the second thing with that, and I'm gonna put a button and come back to that, but the second thing about that, a very good colleague of mine, she's actually listening in on this broadcast. She has a social media channel that I'm gonna plug on Instagram called The Mommy Connection. And on her page, she recently had, again, that Instagram is called The Mommy Connection, but she just had a talk this past weekend for what she works with called Self-Care Saturday. And on that talk, she talked about imposter syndrome. And I think that term speaks for itself for the majority of us. For those who don't know, it's essentially just this metaphysical feeling, but also something very deeply innate within us as well, where we just feel like maybe I'm not the one for this thing. Maybe, this job I'm applying for, maybe this grant that we're trying to write for our organization, maybe this person, this child I'm trying to be for my parents, maybe this partner I'm trying to be in this relationship. Maybe I'm not really it. Maybe I'm not a good fit for it. Maybe I don't measure up. And the wealth of information on that Self-Care Saturday, which I align with, was just saying, you just got to get that voice out of your head, right? That voice does not belong there. But recognizing that voice, I won't say is natural, but it's common, right? And it is, I would say that to have the voice of imposter syndrome be present somewhere should be affirmation that you are pushing towards something in which you are destined for. And the moment you stop hearing that voice, right, you stop feeling challenged. The moment you stop getting resistance in the work that you do, right? You think about, there's a few messages in the Q&A chat about running for politics. And I worry about those who have ideas and have initiatives, or you have efforts that you're pushing in which there's no feedback, there's no pushback. You know, that should be concerning, because in order to fight for the equity that we're trying to do to dismantle systems that have oppressed us, there's nothing comfortable there, right? There's nothing sweet and fulfilling and flowers, right? Some of those processes feel good when we make change, but the process to get there, right, is an uncomfortable one. And the moment we start existing in spaces and rooms, right? Somebody talked about, like, if you ever attending some workshop on equity and dismantling this, and it's a bunch of cookies and refreshments and everything's just feeling good and no conversation is really hitting home, what are we doing, right? Like, what are we doing? And that's a push, I think, that should inspire, right? To say imposter syndrome, like, I recognize that you're there, but I recognize that I'm called. And I'll say a favorite verse of mine is Isaiah 6:8. And in that verse, basically just asking, God is asking a servant, saying, like, what, you know, who should I send to go tackle this issue? And the response is, you know, send me, like, I'm here, send me to go deal with this thing. And I've thought about that verse, not because it doesn't resonate with me because I feel like I'm some justice and advocacy is not a pleasurable thing. It's not a lot of our person, like, they were assassinated. The things that happened to their lives and to their families, there was nothing beautiful about those things. It was murderous, right? It was violent, right? Even the most peaceful proclaimed persons of us all, they say, well, that's not how they would do it. But they got killed anyway. And they did it the way that y'all proclaim we should be doing it. So, like, what's the tea on that? So that's something else that I think about in regards to the first question, or the first response that I gave about, like, really recognizing it was time for me to leave a scenario and leave a situation. My affirmation was in knowing that the faith that I hold, and also the ancestors that I call out to, right, when I pray, and the current family and the current community that I tap into when I do the work that I do, that a lot of things that bring us the most resistance and the things that anger us is because we were placed with that level of accountability, of analysis, to say, you know what, Southern Delaware Alliance for Racial, like, we need you to tackle this issue that nobody else is tackling, right? Or, you know what, Don, you know what, Sade, like, we need you to tackle this thing within your organization. Nobody else is speaking up about it because you are the person who has that mirror level of lived experience, plus the level of education, plus the level of community sensitivity and cultural responsiveness. It's not enough to just know and have information. You gotta act on things, right? And that's knowledge and that's wisdom, but that's understanding and discernment. There's a lot of educated racists out there as well. They read books as well. They're in politics, they're in government, right? They're in the nonprofit space, God bless, right? They're in law enforcement, they're in PTAs, right? They're in schools, they're in healthcare. So knowing that, right, I'll just close with something Bob Marley said. For those who don't know, he actually had a house up in North Wilmington for some time, and he lived in Delaware. Bob Marley, he said, you know, the people who are trying to make this world a worse place, an evil place, they don't take any days off, right? They don't take any days off, so how can I? Yeah. I'll just stop there for now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow. Let me ask a question. You know what, Kyle? You said something that intrigued me, and you said something about, I'm not sure that I would call what I do activism. I think that's an interesting question. What do you all think about that? Can you say a little bit more, Kyle? And then I'd love to get some of you other folks to sort of weigh in on that.
Absolutely. So I'll add in saying that the value of language, I'm going to speak from the lived experience in which I come from and the culture and community in which precedes me. Black people, African people across the diaspora, we were brought to these continents, right, where the only thing we had left was our voices. We had no property, we had no clothes, we had no family sometimes. Everything was stripped and everything was eliminated. The only thing that we've had is our voices and our memories, right? Our traditions, right? So language, even when we get separated from our tribes, even when we're split up in North America, South America, Central America, right? Taken to Europe, even when we're split up, there's this language of vernacular in which we have to adapt and develop to know how to communicate with each other, not just verbally, but do I trust you? Can I engage with you? Can I struggle with you? Right? And sayings within our own community, right? All skin folk ain't kinfolk, right? God bless, right? And when we use certain language within our community, within community period, language changes and adapts. Yeah. And the thing about Black culture, right? Minorities, I don't really think that's even the proper term anymore because we're not a minority within the country nor the planet. But people of color, the things that we have often are co-opted, right? The things that we try to struggle with and create, right? When we're stripped down to our bare minimum, there's this level of surveillance, right? COINTELPRO with the Black Panthers, right? We had the MOVE bombing up in Philadelphia, right? You had law enforcement trying to tap into assimilate. There's a great Fred Hampton movie coming out, great, but the focus of the film is about how surveillance and somebody tapped in who used the language in the words, which sounded good, which sounded right. He shucked and he jived. He moved along to what the Black Panthers did, but essentially was also the cause and the demise, not just on himself, right, as an individual, but in collaboration with this white supremacist system that wanted to dismantle the working of a 21-year-old who was aligning people across coalitions. So the reason why, for me personally, I don't use the word, I have at some time, I'm probably sure I have, depending on, you have to communicate with people and meet them where they are.
Sure.
But spirit to spirit, right? You recognize when somebody's doing the work of a particular thing and you can bond with that. And in the spaces that I sometimes like to navigate, that's something that even to the street and to a neighborhood and to a block, that's not always a verbal communication of what we understand, right? Sometimes the way that Black people communicate when being pulled over by law enforcement, when in the workspace, we can't verbally say what we're thinking. We can't always say where we align at or what our politics hold because, again, this level of surveillance, this level of, well, who are you? What do you call yourself? Who do you represent? As if our experience and our being, my life isn't enough. So I give way to those who utilize language and words that are powerful and that are needed. But I just say, different tools in the toolbox are welcome. And for me, my tools just focus on the work as opposed to the label of, is he an electrician or construction? It doesn't matter. These are the work. That's my experience personally.
Yeah, no, thanks. That's really intriguing. Anybody else like to respond to that or add to it?
I can say I definitely, language does matter. And for me, I don't consider myself an activist, but more so an advocate. And the difference for me starting out, so back in 2018, I started out as a mental health advocate for youth ages 16 through 26 who have a lived experience of a mental health challenge. And for that, even through our trainings, it's I'm not speaking on behalf of myself. I really don't matter in the whole scenario. The population I'm representing matters. And it is my job not to give solution, but give information and give options and allow the population to decide what works best for them. And then I advocate on behalf of their choices. But at most, my top priority is to make sure they are informed, make sure that their opinion feels to them like it matters, and it's being actually fought for, and issues that they have, real solutions are being made on behalf of them. So in advocacy, really, you are advocating for that population that you're serving, and you are fighting for solutions and being completely empathetic and sympathetic with what they're going through. And you're able to speak for those who don't know how to, while simultaneously encouraging them with the language to say and with the options to take and with the actions to take. So I consider it more advocacy, especially in this line of work, than activism.
Thanks.
Yeah, I agree with both. You know, in the Black culture, we do a lot of code switching. So when I'm around my aunts, you know, down south, my mom's from Charleston, South Carolina, and my mom says, "Oh yeah, Sade's doing her community activist thing." They're like, "What? What is that? What's she doing? She out there talking to people again?" So I think you have to understand your audience when you're using those different words. But to me, I'm just doing what I'm passionate about. And so, like Kyle said, all depends on what circles that you're in, and we respect that. But like Jalyn said, it's just advocacy work for me. And, you know, my aunt, you know, she's just happy that I'm out here helping people get registered to vote and mentoring girls. She's like, activist, okay, but what is, you know, what's the general term for that? So it just all depends on, you know, the audience that you need to be around, and, you know, how to just kind of, you know, we code switch. So it all depends on what's happening and how we need to use our language. I'm an English major, so, you know, we can use it when need be.
Thank you. Thank you. Jazmine, do you have anything to add?
It's not really adding, but I'm just gonna agree with everybody because the activism, I just think that we're all just speaking about something that it's just like a natural thing that goes on in our lives. So it's like, I don't know the word. It's just something we're born with. Like, I just feel, me personally, I feel obligated to use my voice to speak about things so I can further educate people that I'm around and speak to everything.
Well, I may need to change my vocabulary, and I appreciate the input. Thank you. I guess one final question before we get, Charlotte, yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I don't have a question, but the audience, I notice, is so intrigued by what the panelists are saying that there's some very good questions waiting for the panelists, and I hope we can get to some of them. But I think what is very true is we're here to learn from young people, because I have learned so much tonight in terms of the message that you've given me. I thank you for that. I really do. And I think the questions that are waiting for you are other people in my generation saying, hey, we've got to ask you some more stuff. Yeah. So that was all I wanted to say about it.
Great. Well, that's a great segue to the questions that are coming in from the audience. And Calvin has been keeping his eye on them. And Calvin, do you want to take
sure.
off on that?
Yep. And I think, Kyle, you took a peek at some of these questions because you mentioned one of them. So one of the questions is, have any of the panelists thought about entering politics, since the structural racism we see reflects political decisions? Any future politicians?
No, but I will say this, that in Dover, I just get so upset going to Dover City Council meetings, seeing all white men. Like, it just bothers me that there's not, there's some Black men on there now, on the at-large party, but it just bothers me that there's not one woman that's up helping making decisions. And so I'm always trying to push someone else to kind of like take on the lead for that. I believe change starts small. I would, you know, it's great to be president of the United States. It's great to be the attorney general. It's great to be those things. But I think that the real politicians, the real leaders are right in your neighborhoods or right in your communities. And we need to push and encourage and empower them to take on larger stages. But I do think when I go to my city council meeting, like, can the woman please stand up? Can somebody help these brothers out? Because they're scrambling and fumbling. And I'm just like I can only give y'all 30 minutes, you know? But so I do think about it, not running. No, please don't call me. Please don't email me. No, but just when I go to city council meetings, I am looking to see who's going to be the woman to rise up in this particular setting.
Anyone else? Jalyn?
Oh.
Yeah, you unmuted yourself.
Yeah, I wouldn't say thinking about running, but from experience, I did sit down with someone who is in office, and my question to them was, you know, why aren't you coming into the community? When I say community, I mean middle class and under. Why aren't you coming into the poverty-stricken communities, the communities that are like Section 8, those who need assistance? Why aren't you going into the Black and brown communities, the Hispanic communities, and seeing what's going on in the population that you represent? Because your job is to, at the end of the day, represent the people. And for you to only come from a certain demographic or certain area and exclude the Black and brown community is a problem for me, because at the end of the day, we put you in office to represent the whole population, whatever your district is, state is, et cetera. And their response to me was they didn't have enough time. So, of course, you know me. Being someone who worked like, you know, 3 jobs at one time, school full time, and still made time to sit my tail on meetings and trainings, time was not an excuse for me. So if I ever did think about running, my job first will be to understand the population that I serve across the board, whether you're Black, brown, yellow, blue, understand what issues are going on within my community first, so I can adequately represent everyone when considering office.
Kyle?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Thank you for all the questions. I'm gonna read a quick quote that came to mind, that I keep a notes tab full of notes, full of quotes, but it's from Ella Baker, and Ella Baker says, you have to reach out to your friends who think they are making it good, and you have to get them to understand that they, as well as you and I, cannot be free in America or anywhere else where there is capitalism and imperialism, until we can get people to recognize that they themselves have to make the struggle and have to make the fight for freedom every day in the year, every year, until they win it. And I think about that because oftentimes we think about Ella Baker, and she has this quote, you know, strong communities don't need strong leaders. But Ella Baker, as well as a lot of our organizers, said a lot of other things too that sometimes don't get the same limelight. Because they touch on particular subjects that sometimes are adjacent to the level of advocacy in which we're circling. So for me personally, I've thought about running for politics. The thought came and went. The thought did not linger for very long. I commend, and I will always look to support and work side by side and in collaboration with those in which our philosophical ideologies do align. I am grateful for the people who have committed themselves to public service and to the political landscape, so to speak. But I'm also going to close by saying that there's a lot of people, and I include myself within the stages of that same movement. There's a lot of people who have identified and said, this doesn't touch on necessarily the question, but it's not about, why. It's not about, why am I not opting into politics? It's what has politics done for me, right? To the depth of the level of voting. And I say this with care and compassion, again, to the sake of what this conversation is about, from levels of class and levels of color and levels of age, right? That come from demographics and come from people who have fought in particular landscapes, fought for particular rights, fought for particular things. But then you have people out here, in which I resonate deeply with, that say, whether it's at the local level, the national level, to say, okay, We have this realm of politics. We have this realm of what civic engagement is and what politics looks like. We had a Black man in office. That was no more racism after that, right? We wiped it out completely. We had the turn of that with the embodiment of a person that for some think is the very first time we've experienced something like this, when in actuality, the person that we have as an occupant in the White House currently is representative of so many people and so many thoughts that cover the landscape of this as what we identify as the United States of America. Mm-hmm. So in saying that, and a person who got into office by not the popular vote, and say, well, you know, our voting system didn't work in the way it was supposed to, and then you're trying to convince people to go out to vote again. But what did we do within the 4 years in which this person was in office? And now wait another 4 years and say that this is the election of our lifetime. And I know that that question is not necessarily to what I'm speaking on now, but this is something that I find important to articulate, right? To say that it's not just about get out and vote, right? But what do we do when we're not voting? What do we do when we're not walking to the ballot box? Who's organizing the voting, right? Who's getting people galvanized? Who's doing the grassroots communications, right? Who's getting the people there in the fall, right? Who's organizing the rides to get there? Who's making sure that people aren't being disenfranchised? That takes work beyond just saying, you know, get out and vote, or just get out and run for office, you know, everything will be clean. I think we've had good leaders in office. What has it produced for me? And I say me as wearing that hat, to Jalyn's point, of those who are most oppressed, those who are most marginalized, those who, whether it's a Black man, a white woman, a Black lady, an Asian person, a mixed person, somebody who identifies as LGBTQ, somebody who identifies as straight, they've seen the spectrum of leadership in office, and their situations have not changed. They still are just trying to put food on the table. They're still just trying to pay for their prescriptions, right? So I think whenever we have a system in which it has boiled down to just to vote, I'm curious about the conversations that can take place adjacent to that, to say, well, vote and what else? Because for a lot of people, that's where their strong suit is. For some of those who are very organized and in touch with the touch points of getting involved in the voting literacy, not just telling people to go out and vote, right? Or getting people to, you know, go out and run for office, but the nuance behind it. I'm also very interested in the people who say, this system is not working historically for us. We have no data to pull from that says over 300 plus years, what point in time was it the good year? What point in time was it the good decade? Which one was it when we say make America great, or when we say build back better? Where are we tapping into, and who was it working for? What was the data point on that? What was the wealth gap on that? What was the school outcomes on that? What was the healthcare for that, right? What did it look like for people? And those are conversations that excite me. So I thank you for holding space for conversations like these. Thank you.
So this question is really for Jazmine, but I think anyone can probably answer it. So Jazmine indicated in her piece to the Cape Gazette her belief that it is not her burden to overcome other people's ignorance. Who, if anyone, has that burden? Or more to the point, how do we overcome that ignorance?
Okay, so when I said what they're referring to is when I was like, we're not obligated or responsible for anybody else's ignorance, because it's 2020, and when this all started back in 2014, really, but when it was really big, like the whole movement and everything, in the beginning of June, I feel like that's when everybody had their chances to, you know, be educated, and some people choose not to listen. And if you can't teach to somebody who's not listening, or you can't preach something to somebody who's not listening, willing to listen, or they're stuck on their own opinions. So when somebody's like, oh, you can't cancel this person, you have to educate them. It's like at some point you need to go out and get that education yourself, just like we have to learn our own history because it's not taught to us. So I feel like if you're going to have this big opinion that's negative, you need to educate yourself and not depend on everybody else to educate you.
Thank you. Anyone else want to add to what Jazmine said? Okay, so next question. Are there any Black organizations that motivated your activism or provided a space for that work? I see you shaking your head, Sade.
The National Coalition of 100 Black Women Delaware chapter, I will say that they are the reason that I have been so passionate about not just mentoring girls, but really understanding the policy behind African American women, the pay gap that we're facing as a total body, and really understanding like how we can write policy and advocate for different policy for the advancement of Black women and girls across our nation. And because of that, I'm a graduate of the Civic Engagement Program. Shout out to the Civic Engagement Program. We are currently recruiting for the 2020 fall semester. But they've been very strategic in making sure that we know what's happening with Black women and girls in Delaware and making sure the data aligns to that, and having that information has been power. So when I go to Legislative Hall, when I go to my city council meeting and I need to advocate on behalf of Black women and girls, I just don't have my passion and my excitement and my heart for it. I have numbers, stats, policy, and things that can really make some hands and some things move. So they're one of a few Black organizations that have been really influential to me. The Metropolitan Women's Urban League, I owe my leadership development for 2020 to them. I am a fellow in that program, and Kyle has been an incredible mentor along with Drew, who have really been advocating and pushing us as Black and brown people to be leaders and to be leaders. But how do we do that? What does that look like? How do we have those conversations? How do we be out? How do we talk to our white allies, and how can they advocate for us and things of that nature? So I think that Delaware is small, but get in where you fit in. Don't be the one that's saying you down for the cause, you down for the people, but you're never at anything that really engages people. You know, I lead our Dover Action Team on behalf of Network Delaware. So get plugged in. All of us on this panel are somehow connected and plugged into some type of organization that can propel your knowledge and your advancement of whatever you're trying to accomplish in life.
Okay, anyone else?
I'll share a few. So 2 local organizations that I believe are committed to the liberation and the empowerment of Black individuals, as well as others in Delaware. Some of you I think are already aware of them, but one is the Building People Power campaign that works in conjunction with what Sade mentioned, the Metropolitan Women's Urban League and Network Delaware. So that's the build, and hopefully, some are jotting this down, but the Building People Power campaign. Another entity that I would recommend would be Delaware Poor People's Campaign as well. I'm not an active member, participant. I've attended and I engage their work. A lot of my work around community engagement, it just has me to be within the know of what's going on so I can connect people to other things. So that's one I certainly recommend, is Delaware Poor People's Campaign. Another third entity within Delaware, it's a little Wilmington specific, but they have national chapters as well. It's called Food Not Bombs. And that's Food Not Bombs. And they've been pretty organized and engaged with providing for people on the ground during this time, during COVID-19, as well as providing support to what we say advocates and activists and those marching during a lot of our protests within the state of Delaware. And then 3 other entities, non-Delaware specific, I would mention. One is called Dream Defenders. Dream Defenders has chapters throughout the country. They do very, very great work. Their most local chapter is right up in Philadelphia, I believe. But that's the Dream Defenders. A second one when we want to talk about literacy and books and reading and study that's committed to struggle and committed to diving much deeper in those uncomfortable conversations and the uncomfortable work, I would say is No Name Book Club. And that's literally the title. That's No Name Book Club, No Name Book Club. And then a third, I would say, y'all asked, so I'm trying to give a couple. Another one nationally, I would say, is the Malcolm X grassroots movement. That movement speaks for itself and within the title of the name and where a lot of their philosophical ideas stem from. One, grassroots, two, Malcolm X. Not just a man, but really the work that he was committed to, and somebody who, like many of our leaders, passed before he even found out what the answer was to the questions he was asking himself. So historically, when I look back, the Black Panther Party heavily involved or heavily informed the rabbit hole in which I went down in the desire for knowledge. But hopefully those organizations, the Building People Power Campaign, Delaware Poor People's Campaign, Food Not Bombs, Dream Defenders, No Name Book Club, and Malcolm X grassroots movement. And historically, the Black Panther Party is always a good case study to look back on and really, really look at their work. It's always a great case study.
All right. Anyone else want to add to that?
Jalyn, let me just, I know that you're working now with the Metropolitan Wilmington Urban League Young Professionals, and you have a special role down here in Sussex County, don't you?
Yes, so I'm actually with Sade. Sade is doing Kent County, I believe, and I'm doing the Sussex County organizing. And as she said, basically promoting and encouraging millennials, especially in Black and Brown involvement in leadership development and political participation involvement, and also different campaigns we have going on. Also, I would add the United Way, who has a collaborative in all 3 counties for racial equity and social justice. And I will add the YWCA, who also is doing a lot of dialogue to action talks across the state in lieu of racial equity and social justice.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, and I guess I would just want to ask each of you, as someone who's not a millennial, what can we do to help support your efforts? And how can we collaborate together?
So for me, just because I'm just already unmuted, but for me, millennial is, I don't really say like when I advocate, when I put on different events that I only look for millennial, our target millennial population. I mean, I influence them because they're the generation coming up, and they'll be the forerunners going forward. But I always have been an old soul at heart. So I pull from the wise, or what I call wise, not older, but wiser folks. So just being available for us to pull, that wisdom from you, and that education and experience that you guys hold, and support us in our journeys going forward in this fight for racial equity and social justice will be a top. I think support is like number one. Just support us. We may do things different than what you guys are accustomed to or used to, but as long as we're doing it the right way, just support us in that and encourage us, because as millennials alone, just being that different one, or that one to step out and say, I'm going to do something today, or I'm going to take action today, is already an effort within itself. So to have that backing behind us would definitely, soothe our, insecurities or our anxiousness. For me, speaking for myself, and also just educate yourself as much as possible, because time waits for no one. So things are very different than they were in the 60s, 70s, 80s. So just keep educating yourself as time goes on, and know the different disparities, not only within race, but also in the age gaps. So we all can work together to make sure everyone has equitable opportunity in this world.
Calvin, let me add to that. Jalyn, I know you noticed that believing in what you say is why we invited you tonight. We support the work of all of you in the hopes that our membership, if they're tuned in, would hear from you leaders, actual leaders and potential leaders, and the Alliance certainly does support you, but also wants you to be part of the education, information, advocacy strategies that we have. You're part of our strategy. We brought you on to talk to people because, as you know, your conversation, especially your conversation tonight, really added to this need for a cohesive public consensus. I mean, legislation isn't going to change it in the end. Public consensus, and that's a big job. So we're going to continue to ask you to be a part of that conversation. And after tonight, I want you to come back next week and the week after and the week after. And by the way, since I have the floor, I hope none of you will run for office. I think that Martin Luther King never would have run for office because he knows the restraints of taking on an elected position. And you're free. I mean, you have no constraints as a leader. You do have constraints as a politician. Just listen to what comes out of some of the mouths of the Black Caucus. They are still having to deal with the restraints of being a politician. You don't have those restraints, so please don't run for office.
I did just want to add though, that's a generic answer. I do appreciate platforms like Southern Delaware Alliance of Racial Justice, United Way, the YWCA, et cetera, for giving millennials an opportunity to speak. Not a lot of organizations, corporations, or even platforms encourage the youth voice or even allow us a seat at the table, but I do appreciate dialogues like this and conversations like this that from a population that wants to hear from us and definitely takes what we say in consideration and genuinely, puts forth the effort to figure out how we all can collaborate together.
I know there's several more questions, Calvin. You want to get through?
Yeah, we may not get through all the questions, but let's plow ahead and see how many we can get through. What role do you see for young white people who wish to be allies? How can white churches support your work in advocacy?
I'm a member of a church where my pastor is white. And I was waiting for the moment that I felt as though he was going to drop the ball and I was going to need to have a much needed conversation with him, being that I come from the Black church experience. And I just made this transition within the last 9 months to this new church. But I was over the moon, excited, proud to be a member of this church when my pastor took several stances in the pulpit, on Legislative Hall, writing letters, having conversations with African-American, congregants, that the way he expressed and the way he carried out, not knowing, he was honest, y'all, I don't know. And that's why I need to know from each of you, and how can I advocate? What policy can I do? And I said, why are there no Black people on this church board? We need to diversify some things, to have some tough conversations. And for him to be so receptive, gave me hope. And just even his response with all the racial tension, how he's responded, how he's advocated, how he's been bold about it. I mean, it's not like that front where where it was like he was pretending just to keep us happy. It was a boldness about it. And there's been some change that has happened in our church because of that. So I will say that, we have to have those tough conversations, that you have to use those pulpits to have those tough conversations. There's a time and place for it. We don't want to be angry every Sunday. Every Sunday, I do not want you up there angry. I need some hope. I need some faith. But there are times where you have to use your pulpit to really have those conversations and to really mean it. And if you don't know, don't speak on it. Go get some knowledge. Go talk to some people. Don't speak on it. But just silence says enough for us as Black people. That when people, even our white friends, your silence has enough for us. And so I encourage that white pastors and, all of that, go get knowledge, but have a voice. Have a voice. If you for us, be for us and have a voice and get the education that you need. And don't be afraid to say, I don't know, because we don't know. We're still trying to figure out some of the new things that are happening.
Sade, give that church a shout out. Which one is it?
United Church of Delaware. I go to the Dover campus.
Thank you.
Pastor Kenneth Wagner.
Okay. Anyone else want to add to that?
I will say that our town hall meeting in October, which will be October 13th, is going to be specifically about race and religion. And we encourage all of you to join us for that town hall, because it's right along the lines of what Sade was just talking about.
Kyle?
Yeah, I had a add-on for Sade. She has my personal experience with church. I grew up somewhat. I was in and out a little bit at church. Came back though. That's what matters. Of church in North Wilmington. Very blessed for that to be a church family in which I always gravitate towards their messages and their community work. I'm going to highlight a particular church that I know I have some members who are attending here, who are listening in that attend, and that's Mother African Union Church on the west side of Wilmington. And you all, I'm sure, are familiar with them, maybe done some work with them. So I would say, like, what does your relationship with other churches who are committed to racial justice look like? So for the question in the chat, like, maybe you already do that, right? Which is great. So if you're looking to do more, it's like, how do you commit yourself to those who are in that struggle, who are doing that work? And I'm going to make the push that people don't have to align with. They can look into, they can consider. But I'm going to make the push that and highlight an individual, Dr. Bettina Love. And she gives this story, and Dr. Bettina Love, she gives a story that talks about Bree Newsom down in, I want to say, Virginia, South Carolina, somewhere down south where the race is, which is a lot of places. But they were taking down a Confederate flag. And in that process of taking down the Confederate flag, this Black woman who went up and scaled this pole, in that process to do that, there was, in all the planning leading up to it, they specifically included a component which included a white man standing by the pole to protect her while she went up there. Because when the police arrived and wanted to get her to come down before she could take the pole down, they wanted to tase the pole, right? They wanted to electrocute the pole, which would force this woman, this Black woman, to fall off, to let go, and to come down. And they said that's one of the reasons why in that moment they needed somebody whose physical body could stand in the way of the violence that would be enacted on Black bodies, specifically Black women, right? Who've always been historically disposable, right, in this United States of America, right? Or even on that same plate, the bottom of the totem pole, the bottom of the pole, I should say, the bottom of the benefits in which this country has to offer. So Dr. Bettina Love argues that being an ally, right, is often, and this is a safe space, but being an ally is often like, again, you're reading the right books, right? You're attending the workshops, you know, you have a few events, you're engaged with a few people, you have a couple friends in your network, so to speak. And she argues that, along with others, that being a co-conspirator says, what am I willing to sacrifice with, though, in this work? What am I willing to lose and to give up? Because identifying that during that step back is going to tell you the level of capacity in which you can engage. It's not to say one's better or worse, but they're honest answers. Again, not in the business of giving best answers, but giving honest answers when you ask yourself, truly ask yourself as an individual. I know another question in there, Calvin, was about, as an older white woman, how do I commit myself to, you know, the struggle of, you know, dismantling white supremacy or educating?
Kyle, you're cheating.
Trying to be efficient with time. So in that vein, it's like, what are you willing to give up? And knowing that will allow you to make that process a lot easier. It's going to make that process a lot smoother. It's going to make that process a lot more authentic. Because we have a lot of churches, we have a lot of businesses, happen downtown Wilmington. You got businesses putting out Black Lives Matter on the side of windows just so they don't get their window busted in. You got people talking about Black owned, right, on the side of their business. Ain't nobody Black owned in there, just so nobody busts open a window, right? Allyship is often a commerce, right? It gets you something. to show up in a particular way during events of social justice, right? You get something during a campaign season in which you can say, I'm out here, I do this. But what do we do in the 364, right? What do we do in the other days when it's not social, when it's not a buzzword, right? When it's not popular, when it's not trending? That commitment to struggle will afford you with how far we can go. And the more that you're willing to sacrifice, I can assure you that you're going to have other people who are oppressed and who are dealing with this on a day-to-day basis, walking hand in hand with you, because we ain't got no choice to deal with it, right? But as somebody who's a co-conspirator, you can choose and opt in whether or not you want to clock in for the work that day. For those who are dealing with the lived experiences, there is no clock in and clock out. Black lives and Black people and oppressed people, we don't clock out. Blue lives can clock out. You can go to work, you can get off work, right? You can get your pension, you get your 401k, you can get all that good stuff. Ain't no pension coming with being Black. Ain't no pension coming with being a woman, right? Ain't no pension with coming being indigenous, right? And having some of the highest substance use rates, some of the highest police violence rates across the country. There's no benefit from that. But to have a position in which you literally can spend your privilege, financially, give sometimes it ain't that deep. Give some money to some folks out here doing a good work. And I would say lastly that if you want to commit yourself to engaging people as a co-conspirator in that work, oftentimes, I'm gonna say for myself, my own privilege, a particular type of people on that spectrum get selected to engage in those conversations. Sometimes we got the degrees, sometimes we went to school, sometimes we talk a particular way, sometimes we we work a particular job, we have perceived access within our communities, we know we can do both, you know? I would continue to push that, go to the people who are furthest on the margin, go to those who are in the gap, right? Reverend Barber says, right? Go to those who are furthest in the gap, furthest dealing with the inequity, the furthest ones. Who are the organizations, the schools who are most underfunded? Which is the poorest neighborhoods in your community? Who are they? Where are they? Start there, right? Because if you can include them, you're going to get everybody else on the back end.
Thanks, Kyle. Appreciate it. We're about 10 minutes over our time, and I don't think that we're going to be able to get to all of the questions. Charlotte, before I close out, do you have any words of wisdom to share with us before I close out?
No, I think that the panel has said all the words of wisdom that needed to be said tonight, and I am exceedingly grateful. Pardon me?
I said I have a few more.
Oh, okay. And I thank you, Don, for a wonderful job at moderating. And Calvin, you know, I think you're a genius with your documentaries. So thank all of you for truly very, very good. And keep up your work, please. The country is dependent on you, the future of the country, and the next generation. And young Jazmine. Jazmine, you're still in high school?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. So we need to do it for you and your generation.
Yes.
Okay, Don, turn it back to you.
I just want to echo my personal thanks. You all have been great to work with in terms of pulling tonight together and being vulnerable and honest and helping us learn. And I'm very, very grateful to all of you. And I just want to close with the words of Alvin Toffler, who was a futurist. And he said, the secret message communicated to most young people today by the society around them, that they are not needed, that the society will run itself quite nicely until they, at some distant point in the future, will take over the reins. Yet the fact is, society is not running itself nicely. We need all the energy, brains, imagination, and talent that young people can bring to bear down on our difficulties. Tonight, I think we've heard from 4 of those people. I'm totally grateful. And to all of our participants, thank you so much for being with us, and good night.
Thank you, everyone.